Hello, guys. Hope everyone's doing okay. Um, I wanted to show this last assignment before our final, and the last assignment is going to be about creating a view that is a little bit better than the one we have in here at the end. In this one, we show materials, we show some sort of translucency, and we show reflections. And that's good enough for a preview, but today we're going to learn more about how to generate a rendering so that we can show um, an object that we did in the computer, and we are going to give it a lifelike aesthetic to it so that it looks not like it's just in the middle of nowhere, but rather it has a site and it shows that the project can be actually built. So that's what we're going for. You can see here that this is the last page of the assignment. I'm sorry, the last page of the package. Uh, for this assignment, all I need is the last page of the assignment or the picture that you're going to render. I don't need to see every single sheet for this assignment. I'm more concerned about seeing the picture that you're going to render or the picture that you're going to output from Rhino. And just to give you a preview of what we're trying to do, um, what we're trying to do is a rendering that looks sort of like the ones that we have in the screen. On the left-hand side, you can see that this rendering was created by Rhino with the default Rhino render. And we're going to go over this as we're going through the tutorial. And then the one on the right-hand side is just a screenshot of the Raytrace rendering engine that Rhino has. So pretty much the difference between these two is that the Rhino render, it's more stable, but at the same time, it takes all the resources from your machine, and as soon as you hit render, you have to wait until the machine finishes to use your computer because it just uses all the power of your processor. On the right-hand side, this is a Raytrace Render. It does use some of your machine resources, but it lets you rotate the model as you're doing this. So if you have a good graphics card, the Raytrace Rendering is more for you because you're going to be able to rotate your view and then just it's going to start updating. Anyways, these are the two uh, type of renderings that you could do in Rhino. You're not required to do both of them. You're only required to do one render. You could pick either to do the Rhino render or the Raytrace render. And if your computer is a little bit slow and you can't produce any of these two, there's another option that I'm going to show at the end as well of how to create a view that looks sort of like this, but it's a low quality image of this. So you have three options to do this assignment. You could pick either one, but the deliverable, it's only one picture that you're gonna upload to the iCampus assignment. Okay, so let's jump into Rhino and then let's figure out these renderings. So now that we're in Rhino, we have the project on, and we are in one of the views that we have in our sheets. We're gonna work off of the view that is at the end of our entire package, as we already talked about. So I have to find that in the file that I'm working on. You can see that mine is in page 10. Obviously, this is a file from you guys. When you're doing these, it's better to have all your sheets named. So rather than have page 1, page 2, page 3, make sure you name your pages or your tabs exactly what they are for the assignments. Okay, so we have the view in here, and what we need to do is first we need to set up our environment. Second, we need to set up our skylight, and third, we need to set up our lights. Now, in order to do all these, what you need to do is navigate into the rendering tab, which should be on the right hand side panel that you have here. You can click rendering, and you're going to see that you have a lot of options. I am going to condense all of them just so that you see everything in here. Yours should look like this when you start. If it doesn't, just condense everything so that you could see what we're doing. We're going to start from top to bottom. That way we cover all of these settings. First, we need to make sure that we're inside the viewport before even going to that rendering tab. So let's do that. So double click your view, make sure you're in the viewport. Now, if you have the viewport and you haven't locked the viewport, what it's going to happen, this is going to rotate your view. It's best to do this when your view is locked. So as a reminder, make sure that when you're working in this, you go into the viewport properties and make sure that this viewport is locked. This one is, so I'm just going to go right ahead and activate the viewport and go into my rendering tab, and we're going to start all the way at the top. So current renderer, so you can see here that we only have Rhino renderer, and that's because the other renderer, the Raytrace Renderer, you can activate it from this menu in here. When you set your view style, you can see it says Raytrace in here. But we're going to stick with Rhino Renderer first, and then we'll talk about the Raytrace. So for the first thing, this needs to be set at Rhino Renderer. And then the next is the view. You have to pick which view you're working on. By default, it's set to current view, but you can have saved views that you can pick here. We'll do this towards the end so that you could see why it's important to have a saved view. So we're going to condense that. The resolution and the quality. You can specify the image size that you want to output. I would recommend at the beginning when you're trying this out, just keep it low, maybe 800 by 600. That way it renders faster. So keep it at that, and then once you like the picture, you can always excuse me, you can always increase the resolution here. One thing to keep in mind is the DPI. You can see it here, the one that I am highlighting. The DPI is the dots per inch. That's pretty much is going to tell you whether if your image looks pixelated or not when you zoom in. The DPI by default is set to 72, and 72 is just pretty much the default for a monitor, any monitor that you could see on your screen. So the resolution of your actual screen right now for the DPI is 72. If you keep it at 72, it looks great when you're looking at in your monitor, but when you print it, you're going to see it that it's going to be blurry. So if you're going to print this, the DPI that you want to have is 150. For us, we're going to print it. We can set it at 150, but when we're doing the test, when we're testing out materials, testing out the render, 72 seems to work a lot faster. So leave it at 72 once we know that our view is working right with the materials and the lights. We can increase the dimensions and the DPI. The same goes for the quality. You can see that we have draft quality. We're going to keep it at that, but towards the end, when we like our results, we're going to put it in final quality. Okay, so I'm going to condense that. And the backdrop. What the backdrop is pretty much the background of the current image that we have. You can see that right now we have solid color. and the solid color is just a color that you can specify. You can see that nothing is happening on mine. And I hit enter. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so as you probably noticed, it wasn't working when I did the solid color. If I were to change it, actually, let's go inside the viewport. If I were to change it to a specific color, it wouldn't update the background in here. And I double check all the settings, everything was, uh, all the settings were okay, and I couldn't figure out the problem. But the problem is that if you start with a top view in the model and then just rotate it into a perspective, it's going to keep the settings of a top view. And what I mean is, as you can see up here in the viewport name, you can see that it says page 10, which is the page that we're on. It says detail, which is we're inside the detail, and then it says top. Even though it's a perspective view, it was started with the top properties. So a way to fix this, whenever you change the solid color and nothing is happening here, nothing is updating, if you click here on the drop down arrow for the viewport name and go into set view, rather than having top, always make sure that you're working in perspective when you're doing this. So we're going to set it to perspective. And nothing is working, and the reason why is because I locked the viewport again. So let's go back, deactivate the viewport, unlock the view, which is good, you know. And then once we unlock the viewport, we go inside the viewport. Now we can change the detail top to set view and set it to perspective. Once we do that, now you can see that the background turns green. That's what it was happening here with the solid color not being able to update. So I'm just going to zoom in, find a good view that I like. And the view that you want to show, it's really up to you. I'm just going to show this particular view like that. And since we're modifying the view, I just, once you're inside the viewport, if you go into the properties of this specific detail, you're going to see that the detail, which means the viewport that we have on, it's set to perspective, whether if it's locked or not. There is a option here in the camera area that is set to 50. Make sure that when you do this, you either can keep it at 50 or you can play around with this. 20 seems to be 20. When you do 20, it does the trick as if you were really close to it. It plays with the perspective of the camera. You can keep it at 20 or 50. I'll leave that up to you so that we can have different results. I'm going to keep mine at 20 so that we're really close to it. Better yet, we'll make it 18. Okay. Now that we have the view that we like, the angle that we like, and the position that we like, we're going to deactivate the view, make sure that we lock this view. Once we do that, if we activate and we try to move, nothing's going to move. It's going to remain the same. So let's go back into our rendering tab. Change the solid color to white. Let's keep it at white. White is fine. Going down through the settings, you can see solid color. It just changes to solid. Gradient, you can have two colors, either white or it could be any other two colors. White just happens to be the last one that we had for the solid color. You could change it if you're choosing that option. In our case, we're not, because we want to show a real life-like scenario for the background. So in our case, what we're gonna do, we're gonna use the 360 environment. So I'm gonna enable that 360 environment. Right now you can see that it has some sort of white areas in here, and that's because the one that we're using is the studio one, which it's almost like a backdrop with two lights lighting the scene. You can see that I have another one here. That's because I was trying to fix the previous issue. But for now, we're going to keep it for a 360 environment. For studio, we're going to click that drop down arrow, and we're going to click, once you click the drop down arrow, you're going to click the plus button. When you click the plus button, it's going to ask you whether if you would like to create a basic environment or if you want more types. Make sure that you pick import from environment library. Okay, once you click import from environment library, Rhino comes preloaded with a few environments. You can see that it says .renv, which stands for Rhino environment. You can pick, for this assignment, pick one of the environments here. We're not going to go deep into creating our own. The stock environments that they have, I think they're pretty nice, pretty good. So you can pick any one that you like, and you can use that. Obviously, don't pick something that is really close, as in an object or a room, right? So you're not going to pick a living room, because this project cannot be with an environment of a living room, right? I mean, it could be, but this project is more of an outdoor project. So let's just pick something that goes along the lines of an outdoor environment. So I'm gonna pick this one, the Seattle library. I'm gonna click open. As soon as you do that, it's gonna load the environment on the background. You can see that now the background is display, and we can see our project in there, which looks a little bit better, but we still need to do a lot of work to this. Now, it's in the middle of the road, which could be a problem if we're building something in the middle of the road. So what we want to do is to rotate this image in the background. We want to rotate our environment so that it's somewhere on the other side of the road. Now let me show you. I'm going to get outside of the viewport, make sure that it's unlocked, and when I rotate this, notice that if I rotate, my environment rotates with it, which it's a good thing, because we can rotate the view, and we can pick another view where we want to display this project. Let's say it's somewhere here. Now, if you hold down Shift, you can pan around. Notice that the environment doesn't move, which is what you want when you want to just find a good area. I think we pick one that is right in the corner. Let's go back to the rendering and pick one that is not in a corner. Let's pick this one, see where we are. Yeah, this one definitely works better. It's right in the middle of this big open space. So I am going to put it right here. Though the quality of the background is a little bit low quality. Is that how the other one was? Yeah, that's just a preview of it. And you can switch back and forward by just clicking on this and then just selecting the one that you want. I'm just trying to center it. And one thing to mention is that when you change your uh, lens length, the one that we modified earlier, the background updates with it. Let's do 50. You can see that we're really up close. Let's do 15. Looks better. Okay, we're gonna pick something like that. We're gonna go back into the rendering. So we cover the 360 environment. If we switch it to wallpaper, all that is you could pick a picture like a .jpeg to go behind it. That's not what we want. We want to do the 360 environment. Transparent background, when you render, if you have this enabled, it's only going to render, even though we have the environment on it, it's only going to render the lights and all the quality of the object. And it's going to put a transparent background to it. It's not going to render the outside. That's not what we want, so we're going to leave that unchecked. The ground plane, this is for whether the shadows are at a certain plane. Right now I have it at automatic, which is fine. It's going to pick the lowest point, or you could just, if you start everything at 0, you could put it at 0, 0. You can see that you can show the shadow only, or you can use a material. As soon as I click that, it picks a material for the background that you could put any other material. Because we're using a environment, we don't want to use material for the ground, so we're just going to say show shadow only, and then we're going to click OK. So that's pretty much it for the backdrop. So let me condense this. As far as the lighting, we have a few things in here. You can see that we can enable where the sun is. This one doesn't show too much of a shadow, and let's figure out why. You can see that as soon as you activate the sun, if you click the sun settings, you can pick whether if it's on or off. Obviously, we want it on. The north is set to the Y axis. I'm sorry, to the X axis. We want to set it to the Y, or we have the ability to move it around. I'm going to move it around just so that you can see some shadows. You guys can see the shadows are moving down here. And then the sun position, you can see that this file is set to January 1st of 2000, which is really back in time. So we're going to set it to today's date, 2020. Today happens to be May 4th. Okay, and right now it's set at 12. You can increase or decrease the time of it, depending where your location is. We're gonna set it at 4 just so that we can have some nice shadows in here. If you want your environment to work with your project, or your project to work with your environment, make sure that the shadows follow your environment. In this shot, I'm just over exaggerating the shadows just to show you how to move it, but you guys can play around with that. We can activate daylight savings or not activate it. It just produces smaller shadows. I'm going to deactivate it to have big shadows. And right now, you can see that this is somewhere in Africa. So let's put on this search bar, let's put Chicago. Once you find Chicago, double click that. If you click here, it's going to try to find you where you are. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You can see that it picked China. I don't know why. So we're just going to put it back to Chicago. Double click Chicago. And then the time zone that you have. which Chicago is at UTC -6. So we're going to click OK. Okay, so we have the sun. We modify the sun settings just to have some shadow effects. The skylight, that's going to illuminate your colors based from your environment. If you don't have this active, you're going to get some crazy results here. You can see that I didn't lock my viewport. So let's do that. Okay. Notice that when I click outside of the viewport, um, my background goes away, and that's because you need to be inside in order to see inside the viewport in order to see the preview of your environment. So I'm just gonna lock that. Double click to go inside. Make sure it's locked, which it is. Go back to the skylight, what we were just talking about. Make sure you have it on. Intensity is always at 1. That seems to be always the case. If you put it higher, it's going to start washing out your render. I'm going to do 5, I think is the maximum that you can do. You can see it's really overexposure. You have a lot of overexposure when you increase it to 5. So always keep it at 1. Don't modify that. For the skylight, you can see that we have the ability to use an environment for the skylight. You can see that we have studio, which is not the background that we're using. So we're going to click here, and you have the same environments. You can have one environment for the skylight and one environment for the background. So we're going to pick the same one, which was this one. And you can see that the colors reflect more of the environment. So they pretty much try to match the colors that you're going to get from this object being in this specific environment. Excuse me. As far as the lights, if you click this button in here, you can see that we have sun and skylight. We didn't really talk much about how to create lights because it wasn't necessary for this project. But if you have lights in this project, Rhino is going to show a list of them, and you can either click on this light bulb and it's going to turn it on or off. Tells you what type of light it is. So you can click OK, and ambient light, you can always leave it as the default. Okay, so we cover most of the lighting. So we're going to condense that. Click wireframe. For the wireframe and advanced Rhino settings, we're not even going to go through them because they're really advanced settings, and I don't think it's beneficial for us. One more thing that I'm trying to find. So you have the environment, and then lighting. Okay, I was just double checking because before there used to be another setting for the reflections. You could have 3 environments, but it looks like they pretty much condense the reflections into the 3D environment, and then the reflections are included in that one. So we only have to worry about the backdrop. Oh, no, I lied. It's right here, right after ground plane. You can see use custom environment for reflections. You can see that we still have the studio. So make sure that you change that to the one that you're using. Okay, that looks better. So we have three things that we need to change. One is the background environment. The next one is the reflection environment, and then the skylight environment. Make sure that those three have the same environment for this assignment. You can see it looks way better once we change that. So I am going to condense that. We talk about lighting. Um, okay. And it looks like now it's good to render. So we're going to hit render in here to try to render, and let's see what we get. So I'm going to click render, and notice that nothing is happening. And the reason why is because Rhino restricts the use of rendering only in views that are not layout views, which is what we're working on right now. So what we're going to do is we need to take this view that we have here and make sure that we can render it. So we need to go into our display tab. Let me just cycle through these tabs. We need to go into our set view tab. Make sure you're inside the viewport. You have this viewport activated. Go into the set view tab, and you're going to notice that we have a bunch of tools in here. The ones that we're looking for is just the camera one, which is toggle name views panel. So this is going to bring views that could be plan views, perspective views, any type of views that we have saved in the project. And when I say saved, I mean the camera position of it in regards to the model. So that's what we're trying to do for this one. So we're gonna save. We're gonna click that button, and notice that it's gonna prompt us for a name. So we're just gonna say assignment 11 render view. Click OK. And notice that now we have assignment 11 render view in here. We can move this to the side, and we're going to double click to get out. And now we're going to go into the perspective view, which has already the environment in there because this is set to render. If this was set to any other view style, all our render settings are not going to show up. So we're gonna keep it at render, and then we're just gonna double click this view, the one that we saved, so that the perspective viewport that we are on updates to that view. So I'm just gonna double click this, and notice how it goes to that specific view. Now, when you do this, make sure to turn on and off layers that you don't need. Notice how I still have some layers in there. And that's the whole reason why we broke it apart into specific names, so that we can just turn off the whole group of layers. And that way we don't have to deal with selecting individual layers. You can see that in this specific project, we still have the curves shown here, probably because they are not in the right layer. So if that happens to you and you're rendering, you can just say SEL for selection, and then CRV for curve. Select curve, and it's going to select all the curves. You could then say hide. It's going to hide that, and by the same token, you can say SEL PT for point. It's going to select all the points and then say hide. And now we have a clean view in here. Now that we have the view that we want, I'm going to close this, name view panel, okay. So we have the view, we don't have the layers that we need to, we have the environments, we have reflections, We have the Skylight. And all we need to do now is render. So we're going to go back into our render tab right here on the right hand side, and I'm going to click render. Now, because I'm recording this in the same machine that I am rendering, I know for a fact my computer might crash because when I hit render, it's going to take all the resources. So my computer might crash. So I'm going to hit render and then stop the recording. And then I'm going to restart it again once this finished, and then we'll talk about it. I opened this window here just to show you the computer processor power that whenever it's rendering, it's just going to the max in here. And after it finishes rendering, it's just going to go and dip down. Mine, it started doing this again because I'm recording, but I just wanted to show you that it takes all your resources. With that being said, it would be a good practice to save your project just to keep all your rendering settings and all your environment settings saved. Just make sure that you save before you render. It's just good practice to do that so that you don't lose any work. Okay, so what we get after we hit render and we wait for a couple minutes, you can see mine took about 16 minutes, and that was a low quality render with a low resolution, 800 by 600. You can see that it took almost 20 minutes. So when you increase the resolution and when you increase the DPI, that rendering time is going to grow exponentially. So if you're going to do a final render with a high DPI of 150, it might take a couple hours. So just keep that in mind. For the purposes of this tutorial, if you render at 800 by 600 at 72 DPI, I will accept that. If you want to produce a higher output, you can do so, but just keep in mind that I'm okay with a low resolution image. Obviously, I just don't want something that is really pixelated, so just pick 800 by 600 by 72 DPI. That would be acceptable, or the minimum acceptable for this assignment, which is a 20-minute rendering, which I think most of your machines should be able to do that. Okay, once we are in this window, you can see that we have a couple post-production tools that we can use here. We have the gamma, which actually is just correcting the color of your rendering based on your monitor. 1.8, 1.5, you can pick whichever one looks best. I know for mine at 2.2, which is the default, everything looks bright and it looks a little washed out. So for mine, I tend to keep it at 2. That seems to be what works for me. Yours may vary depending on your monitor that you have. So this is based on the monitor that you have and how it affects brightness. So just play around with this. The maximum is 5 until it looks good. The tone mapping, we're not going to worry about. And then you also have some post effects where you can add fog, glow, glare, depth of field. None of that is required. You are welcome to play around with this. Basically, what you have to do is just click the button and it's going to activate the fog. Just keep in mind that if you do that, it's going to start, for some of them, it might re-render again. For some of them, it has to calculate, I know the glow one, it has to calculate where the glow spots are. So it might have to do a little bit more of a processing before it can display here. So what I like to do is once I have this rendering in here, I like to save it. So you're going to click this button and then save it. Mine, you can see it's on assignment 11. So I'm just going to save it. I'm going to call it tutorial, and then we're going to call it Rhino Render. And I don't write my name on these, but make sure that you, I'm sorry, I don't type my name on these, but make sure that you type your name instead of the tutorial. You can just put your your last name and then put assignment 11, Rhino Rendering. And the reason why is because when I get these, they don't put a stamp on them, so I have to. I know your projects, I know how they look like, but it makes it easier for me to know who I'm grading. When I get these. So I'm gonna click save, and that's just gonna save this image. Now you can go into um, the folder that you have, open it up, and then that's the file that you're gonna upload. Um, so that would be it for the Rhino render. I'm gonna click the X here. Now, if you click the X here and you didn't save the image, you might have to re-render again just to get this image. But just as a comparison, I'm gonna put it to the side. You can see the difference between a Rhino preview with a Rhino render in here. You can see the difference. This looks way better than that. That's just because the reflections are working, the skylight is working. If you hold control and then your middle mouse wheel, if you zoom in, you can see that there are some spots where it's really grainy, and that's because of the DPI. One of the one is for the DPI, and the other reason it's because the material that we have, it's probably a brush metal. That's why it looks grainy, because the resolution is low. If you have multiple lines running in there, it's going to show as a grainy pattern. So just be aware that your materials play an important factor whenever you're rendering. One more thing that I just want to mention before I close this is that these tools up here, what they do, they just have different layers in which you can save those image. And when I say different layers, you can see that these two are the same. That's just because they just show the RGB value. But if we start clicking on different buttons, it's just going to show you the separated RGB, the green, the red, the green, and the blue. We also have a shadow pass, which it just shows the shadows. For this one, it's only showing the background. This one lets you see, this button lets you see the effects that I was just describing. For these two are grayed out. Obviously, these are enabled when you're rendering. You can stop the render or you can pause the render. Most of these, if you hover over it, it tells you what they are. For this one, you can copy the image to Clipboard and then save image. And then this one, it just clones the render window. That means it's going to leave a copy of this window open. And then when you hit render, it's going to use another window to render, just to show the difference between those two. So I'm going to put it back how we had it before. And okay, so let's talk about the other type of rendering, which is the Raytrace Rendering. For that rendering type, in order to enable it, you need to go into the viewport name where it says render view, and then just click on the drop down arrow and make sure to enable the ray trace. Now, I haven't enabled it just yet, and that's because as soon as you click this, it's going to start rendering the active viewport, and it's going to render in parts. That means that it's going to render in cycles, better yet. And that means that for each cycle, it's going to render a rough image of your viewport, and then it's going to refine it as it goes through the next cycles. So I'm gonna click on the ray trace just so that you can see what happens. As soon as I click that, notice that we have a bar down here that says ray trace and then cycles and then it says rendering. So what that's doing, it's preparing the view to render. Mine, it's struggling a little bit. That's just because I'm recording. But I want to show you that we have a few objects down here. We have a pause button, padlock, and then the name. We talked about the name. The pause button is just going to pause the cycles that it's doing. And then the lock button, it's going to lock the view or the viewport that you have in here, just in case you zoom in or out by mistake. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop the recording and let it render, and then I'll come back once this is done. Okay, and we're back. I let the Raytrace Render running for about 10 minutes. You can see it here, 10 minutes, 13 seconds. Before I called them cycles, but they're actually called passes. The passes are the every time it refines the render as it's going. So this one did 289 passes in order to get to this level of detail. You can see that I paused the Raytrace viewport render in here, and I haven't locked my view. It's okay if you don't lock it because we already have it saved. What that prevents you is from zooming in and out. But now that we have this, we know that a good amount of passes is going to be about 200 passes. So now that we know that, in order to take this viewport and save it, what we need to do is go into our standard tab, and then we're going to navigate to this button here, which is the shaded view. And we're going to press it and leave it pressed. And you're going to notice that there is another type of camera that looks as gray and blue. We're going to use this one to save the viewport. You can see that when I hover that, it says capture file to capture viewport to file, or right click capture viewport to clipboard. So we're gonna left click this one, and what it's going to do is gonna bring another window, and in this window it's gonna prompt you which type of view would you like to save. In this instance, we want to save our camera that we called assignment 11 render view, which is that. We don't want to include the grid. We don't want to include the axis or the C-planes, nor do we want a transparent background. So everything unchecked here. The resolution, this one is going to be the same as the other one. It's acceptable. Just for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm actually going to increase the resolution just to see how long it takes to do a 1600 by 1200. You can see the scale is set to 1. The resolution, this is just pretty much the same information that you picked up here. And then it tells you the number of passes that you want to do to your view. So in this one, I'm going to say 200 because we know 200 is a good starting point. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now, once I hit OK, I'm going to stop this recording. Otherwise, my computer might crash. And then I'll restart the recording again once it finishes, just to show you the end result. Okay, and we're back. A few things that happened after I hit the OK button. After I hit the OK button, I was prompted with a dialog box asking me where I wanted to save this specific viewport capture. Pick a place, and after you do that, then there's another window that's going to show up displaying the progress. For mine, it took about 43 minutes to output the render. And you can see here, this is the one that it outputted. You can see it's bigger than the previous one that we did. And the metal on it is really smooth. And that's because we increased the size of our render. So if I compare it side by side with the other one that we did, you can see there's some differences between Rhino render on the right hand side and Raytrace render on the left hand side. The Rhino render, you can see that the glass looks a little bit more real than the actual Raytrace. You can see that the blue reflections of the glass, they show up on the ground, whereas the Raytrace, it shows only shadows of the glass, but it doesn't really show that blue tint color that we get with the Rhino render. So there's a few differences, but you can see that they both work okay as far as what type of materials you assign to them. So the decision is yours whether you choose one or the other. Okay, going back to Rhino, one thing that I want to mention before I moved on with the Raytrace render, when you're exporting the viewport, we click this button here. But before you click this button to capture the viewport file, please do make sure that you pause the current viewport ray trace. Otherwise, what's going to happen, and this happened to me a few times, Rhino is still rendering the ray trace for the viewport, while at the same time is rendering the same viewport to output to a file. So it's double rendering. So before you click this button, just do make sure to pause your rendering. You can see here that mine says play. That's because I already paused it, and you can see that it's displayed here that it's the viewport render, it's paused. So make sure that you do that before you move on. So the last thing that I want to show up is, let me switch this to render just to make sure. The last thing that I want to show is, what do we do if we don't have a good computer and we can't render, whether if it's on Rhino render or whether if it's on Raytrace render? And the answer is, we print the view as is displayed in this viewport straight to PDF, and we do it with this preview that is already shown in here. Now you can see that when I double click outside, my viewport turns, the background of my viewport turns to white. So we need to fix that before we can actually export. And remember, this is last case scenario, just in case nothing works in your machine, the Rhino render doesn't work, and the Raytrace takes a lot of your memory, and you are unable to do the renderings. So what we're going to do is, when we're printing this sheet, we're going to go into File, Print. You can see that right now you are able to see the background. That's because I overwrote it. But the setting that you want to look for is, and it's right around here, for the visibility. Yes. So for the visibility, what you need to enable is the background color, and let me switch it to page 10. Okay, so page 10. And these sheets are not set up. That's why we're having all these issues. Enter. Okay, let's say you fix what we want to print, and yours is set up to the right scale. I think I have scale to fit. Do 1:1. Yeah, that was it. Okay, so we set it to layout, page 10, 1:1, and the setting that you're looking for is background color. Notice that when I turn that on or off, we get the background. So that's last case scenario. When I hit print, then it's going to prompt me where I want to save it, and it's going to save as a PDF with the background. And this is only a preview; it's not going to render or anything else. And again, this is last case scenario. If you can't render, and if your computer is bugging out, that's what you would submit. But I would prefer to have an actual render. So that's all I have for you guys today. And as far as the final goes, I will make another video probably Friday about what are we going to do for the final. Thanks for watching, guys.